welcome to this installment of the Good Old Days audio collection. This is Ken Tate, editor of Good Old Days magazine, and your host for this look back to those days gone by. In this special collection of memories, we'll recollect wonderful memories of Grandma and Grandpa, and remember lessons learned in those happy days of yesteryear. Come back with me and share these memories of the time we know affectionately as the good old days. The first Sunday after Labor Day each year is Grandparents' Day. With that in mind, I thought it'd be a good idea to get out the memory books and give you an assortment of nostalgia by and about grandmas and grandpas from all over. As Janice and I were gathering material for this collection, I couldn't help but think of a very special woman, my own grandmother. Grandma May Stamps was quite a lady. She was widowed a few months after my mother was born. She never married again, electing instead to concentrate on putting together a living for her and her 3 children. The family lived in a little lead-mining town called Melva in southern Missouri. Don't look for it on a map. There's nothing left of it except a few old foundations along the Missouri Pacific Railroad line. The land was mostly cedar glades, with a few good bottoms along Turkey Creek that could be used for farming. Grandma raised a few cattle and pigs with the help of her older boys, and always tried to have a good garden. If it weren't for that garden and the produce that came out of it, I'm sure the family would have gone hungry more often than they did. But Grandma was a proud woman, and that pride drove her to keep the family's body and soul together. With the help of her older brother, Sherman, she saw her children grow strong and independent. I, of course, don't remember any of that. It was part of the spoken lore passed to the 3rd generation at bedtime when sleepy eyes begged for just one more story of the old days. And she had them. Tales of going back and forth between Oklahoma Indian Territory and Arkansas in horse-drawn wagons. Stories of lonely prairie nights, camp revivals and Chautauqua meetings. Remembrances of cowboys and Indians when they were the real thing, not just some childhood game or Hollywood half-truth. Grandma was the living link to history that most kids could only read about. I loved Grandma for her warm lap when I was cold or hurt. I loved her for her strength of character, strength she had right up to her passing. But when I think back to our many days together, I think what I loved her most for were the memories she built into my mind and my soul. Memories of the good old days. All of us had grandfathers, and many of those grandpas were fun-loving, rascally sorts who loved practical jokes, as long as they were being played on someone else, that is. Opal's self had just that sort of mischievous grandpa. Join Opal and see how the tables were turned on Gran'pappy Samuel.
My great-grandpappy's name was Samuel, but his children called him Pa, and their children said Gran'pappy. Anyone who dared to call him Grandpa or Grandfather would have felt a smart smack from the back of his hand across their backside. Though a rather short, pompous man with white teeth and a beard as black as his thick curly hair, he was a tyrant in his family and among those who worked for and with him. His word was law, and he was always right. At least, his wife accepted his authority, as did 15 of his 16 children. Red-headed, freckled Margaret Ann defied him, argued with him, disobeyed him, and was punished cruelly. But when he spoke of his children, it was Margaret Ann whose antics brought a twinkle to his eyes. And it was Margaret Ann who was most often disciplined, by reading from the Bible when the offense was minor, whipped when the offense was dire. It was Margaret Ann who accepted her discipline with a shrug of her shoulders and an exasperated explanation, "I guess I'm just too much like Pa." In spite of Samuel's strict discipline at home, he was a practical joker among his friends, loved playing pranks, and it was typical of the man that though he would go to great lengths to play tricks on others, he resented jokes that bested him, especially his own jokes that backfired and made him look ridiculous. Some neighbors worked hard at thinking up ingenious tricks to play on him. Often his own tricks reversed themselves. One neighbor had an old maid daughter named Laura Williams, who had been a tomboy all her life and preferred the work and conversation of the men to the more refined and ladylike visiting of the womenfolk. Samuel had smarted all one summer after the spring she maneuvered him into a false position with the new neighbor. Word had spread around that Widow Johnson and her lovely daughter were moving into the big country home that was the showplace of the county. Samuel overheard Laura whispering to a friend what a terrible thing had happened. Someone had removed all the doors from the big house and stacked them on the front porch. Samuel slipped over the next day and hung all the doors as a good act for new neighbors, only to learn later that Mrs. Johnson had hired a man to come out from town to remove the doors to accommodate her bulky furniture. She was furious and made a trip over to scorch Samuel pretty good. Laura never mentioned it to him, but she wore a satisfied smirk for several days. Gran'pappy tried many ways to get even, from emptying a pillow full of goose feathers on Laura one sweaty day to pouring molasses in her hair the day a crowd gathered to make sorghum molasses. She took it all in good fun, and her pleasant acceptance lulled him into a relaxation of his defenses. Cold weather came, and the Williams family made plans for a butchering. Gran'pappy was in high spirits and took all the family over to help with the butchering, rendering, grinding sausage, cutting up the meat. He tied his riding mare to the back of the spring wagon. Usually the rest of the family went home early to do the chores, and Samuel liked to stay late, and truly the women were tired enough to go home about sundown. It had been a busy, glorious day. They carried samples of tasty fresh beef and several cuts of pork home for their own use. The children chatted incessantly of the wonders of the day's activities. Supper was over, and a fire roared in the huge stone fireplace before the excitement began to die down. The grown boys had fed and bedded down the stock, finished the milking and small chores. Still, they lingered at the barn. It was after 9 o'clock when they came to the house looking worried. "Pa's horse just came in alone," Jim said to his mother in a quiet voice. Ma looked worried. "The rain looked like it'd been cut," said Bob. The quiet that settled over them now was no longer lethargic. Everyone felt Ma's concern. "You'll have to walk," ventured Jim, "and I've heard tell of a bobcat sighted around here lately." "If he cuts through, it won't take long," Bob tried to reassure his ma. At almost 10 o'clock they heard a shout from the lane, Samuel's voice, shouting wildly. John opened the door, and Samuel ran in, slammed the heavy door behind him, and leaned against it, puffing and panting. "Something chased me," he panted. "Every time I looked back I could see something white chasing me." "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. It kept gaining on me, and it's just outside, right now." His breathing was more normal now, and his heavy calfskin coat was hot in the warm room. He turned from the door to remove his coat, and a deadly quiet settled over the room. Margaret Ann snickered. Even Ma joined the children in the uproarious laughter. Pinned to the back of Samuel's coat was the white-tipped tail of the calf they had butchered that day at the Williams home. "You'll never top her this time," laughed Ma. Samuel hung his head, and his face was red. Then he swore to cover his embarrassment.
Let's grow old together. Love like ours will never die. Hand in fair and stormy weather, as the years roll by. Dear heart, we're dancing. It's time for romancing, for just we two. Heart to heart beating, my lips keep repeating, I love but you. Dreams of the future arise into little blue eyes. Let's grow old together. love like ours will never die, hand in hand in fair and stormy weather, how just you and I. On our golden wedding day, dear, I love you, I still will stay, dear, so let's grow old together, sweetheart, as the years roll by.
That was Sweetheart, Let's Grow Old Together, performed by Kenny Baker on The Jack Benny Show, originally broadcast on January 31st, 1937. It wasn't a calf's tail that got Grandma Brown's goat. It was an ornery brindle bull. Bruce Bell remembers how his grandmother finally summoned the courage to face her biggest fear in Grandma and Mr. Tyke.
My Grandma Brown was a gentle little lady perpetually clad in black, and the soul of politeness and reserve, especially when meeting strangers. But when she first made the acquaintance of Mr. Tyke, she told him to his face, with the backyard and a picket fence between them, that he was a vulgar, loud-mouthed, ornery scoundrel, and she would thank him henceforth to keep his distance, her tone of voice suggesting that a mile would be too close. Grandma had been making her home with us for a year on our Huckleberry Knob farm. Mr. Tyke was our Jersey bull. Grandma feared a bellowing bull as she feared one of the earth-shaking thunderstorms that in summer often sent her flying to the insulation of her feather bed, judging the potential deadliness of each by the volume of noise it made. Mr. Tyke's bellow was an ear-splitting glissando that began on the low bass note of a slide trombone and soared to the shrill whoop of a moaning freight whistle. It should have convinced a less timid soul than Grandma that he was a killer. Grandma's only previous acquaintance among Mr. Cows, as she called them, was our old Guernsey, a gentle, hornless patriarch who was pleased to attend to his harem of 20 and let the rest of the world go by peaceably. Occasionally, Grandma met up with him as she went skittering over one of the dusty, hoof-marked paths on her way to visit Barbara Smith, who lived in the farmhouse facing the back end of our cow pasture. Gurney would look up from his bluegrass and note Grandma's passing with a friendly curiosity. For a neighborly visit made on foot, Grandma wore her second-best mourning, starched black figured calico that covered her ankles, and replaced her everyday sunbonnet with a little round hat of black straw, a Grosgain ribbon, and widow's veil that hung down between her shoulder blades. She and Gurney were used to each other. Grandma would call out cordially, "Sook, sook, Gurney," and after staring at her a moment, he would toss his venerable white-faced head and resume his grazing. By and by, Gurney grew so old that, although unwilling, he had to be retired. To replace him, Dad went and bought a handsome brindle 2-year-old Jersey bull registered as Mr. Tyke. Dad led him home, protesting vigorously every step of the way, on a stout chain tied to the back of the farm wagon, and released him into the pasture through a back gate. After that, he hurried off to his plowing and forgot to warn Grandma about the fierce young bull on the premises. He well knew that when my brother Hubert and I went to drive the cows home from milking, we would be able to meet the situation. At 12 and 14 years, we'd done it before. About 6 o'clock, just as Grandma had gone to the kitchen to start supper, the cows came of their own accord into the pen next to the backyard where the milking was done on summer evenings. Grandma picked up a stew pan and trotted out to draw some milk for gravy to serve with the ham that she was preparing to fry. Grandma elbowed her way through the herd to the brindle back she thought belonged to Daisy, the easiest milker on the farm. "Stand over," she commented, pushing a brindle hip with her milking stool. "So, Daisy." Grandma had already seated herself and adjusted the stewpan when she saw to her astonishment that the cow was not a Daisy model, Mr. Tyke whirled around to find out what was happening. Grandma had never before seen a bull ring so close to her face, not even one without a bull's wet nose, to say nothing of the whole bull attached. It's doubtful, too, if Mr. Tyke had ever beheld close up a piece of cloth the size and color of Grandma's apron. Her one indulgence in the bright colors she loved was to tie a vivid apron over her black skirt when doing housework, and this one was a violent turkey red. With a loud rattle of his bull ring and chain, Mr. Tyke opened up the pink cavern of his mouth and let out a bellow that loosened her side combs. Grandma hurled her stew pan toward the kitchen and ran, and she was through the gate and in the yard when it struck the grass. After that introduction, Grandma always reasoned that Mr. Tyke had deceived her by being a bull, and therefore never to be trusted. She said a body wouldn't dare to cross the pasture to visit a neighbor, now that that treacherous beast was at large. And furthermore, if Hubert and I valued our lives, we'd better not go there any more to play. As a playground for farm boys, a pasture held equal rank with a barn loft and a spring hollow. There was a creek where trillions of minnows twitched through the lazy waters, and crawdads scooted backward under the shallow mud. In the moist swamps nearby, masses of purple-topped ironweed stood waiting to be stripped of their leaves and used as javelins. In the woods were shaggy hickories, fat gray beeches, and tall straight black oaks to tempt our climbing skill. Hubert and I had no intention of sacrificing these pleasures to humor a bull, not even if he had been a bull, as Grandma insisted, deliberately. The morning after Grandma's disagreeable experience, we set out promptly to learn how the land was going to lie between Mr. Tyke and us, and by running swiftly, we were soon far enough down the pasture to pretend that we couldn't hear Grandma when she came out to call us back. With a jangle of his chain, Mr. Tyke came snorting from the woods to rout out the trespassers. In the selfish manner common to Jersey bulls, he'd already taken possession of the pasture and everything in it, including 20 new wives. Hubert and I stood our ground firmly. Mr. Tyke knelt down and buttered the earth, daring us in a harsh voice to come closer. Armed, Hubert and I advanced boldly into the arena, though not too far from an emergency exit, the rail fence. Mr. Tyke tore out a hunk of sod and spread it with his horns, as an example of what he was about to do to us. A rock from my hand bounced off his jawbone. Another from Hubert's cracked him on the head between the horns. Mr. Tyke jumped up and fled, but he was so full of fury and wild screaming noises that his brindle hide almost burst a seam. We had won the first round. By using patience and hundreds of well-aimed rocks, we eventually taught Mr. Tyke that when it came to bull-headedness, a male Jersey had nothing on Hubert and me. We conquered him more easily than we'd hoped, for we discovered that a bull, as well as a person, may put up a bold front to hide a cowardly heart. One of the infallible ways we had of drawing him into battle was to crouch with our ammunition in a concealed opening in the underbrush and lure him with feminine moos. When he came running, goggle-eyed with anticipation, we jumped up from the bushes screaming and met him with a volley of rocks and clods and dead sticks. This violent disruption of his plans so confused him that he hardly knew what or whom to attack. Screaming with chagrin and tail stiffened out behind him like a walking cane, he would gallop off and furiously butt his head against the nearest tree. He spent the most of his first summer at our place in frustrated high-tailed retreat. Oh, there was one afternoon when he suddenly turned and sent us up a tree we didn't know we could climb. But luckily it was a mulberry tree in full harvest, and by the time we were ready to come down, Mr. Tyke had cooled off and gone away on some other business. Never having made the test, Grandma didn't realize that an enraged bull usually makes a far more hair-raising noise in flight than in pursuit. During most of our playtime, she stood in the backyard, nervously wringing a dish towel and expecting our flattened remains to be tossed over the pasture fence. She curtailed her visits to Barbara Smith's because now they involved going so far out of her way. The pasture lay in the shape of a capital T, with the farm buildings at the base, and midway of the upper edge, exactly half a mile from the house, there was a gate opening onto the Smith farm. The long upper stretch adjacent to the Smith farm included acres that were too rough to cultivate, and some that were hardly suitable for walking. The whole area was laced with cow paths. which would have given Grandma smooth, level footing to the gate. For when a cow engineers a path for her own use, it will take her, and anyone who follows, up a hill with the least amount of climbing and down the least amount of braking. With Mr. Tyke on the loose, Grandma would never approach the gate by one of the convenient but highly exposed pathways. Instead, using a rail of the fence as she would use the handrail of a banister, she trailed over rocks and newberry vines all around the inner edge of the tee, ready, if Mr. Tyke spotted her from afar, to escape at the first snort. One afternoon, after clambering over the rails into a field of wet, freshly plowed ground, she came home fizzing like a lit fuse. Dad said, "That's foolish, Ma. What you ought to do is walk right across the pasture and ignore Mr. Tyke. Don't you know a bull can always tell when a person is afraid of him?" Grandma said, "Well, if it's me in the same field with him, it wouldn't take a very smart bull to tell it." Mr. Tyke then revealed a habit which destroyed any hope of friendly relations with Grandma. He had a passion for chewing cloth. He would filch anything from a pocket handkerchief to a rag rug and gallop away, and later it would be found somewhere in the pasture, chewed up and slobbered beyond recognition. Grandma abandoned all thought of visiting Mrs. Smith. She said that varmint would most likely follow a body over the pasture fence and eat the clothes off in broad daylight. This, in Grandma's view, was a fate far worse to contemplate than death by hooking. Grandma's modesty was of the old school, that even forbade hanging her most personal underwear on the clotheslines with the rest of the family wash. Wind puffed the garments full of air and made them look alive. Those long ribbon-laced tubes of muslin, dangling from the line in pairs and kicking in the breeze, would have revealed to the whole world that Grandma had not been fashioned in one piece from the waist down. She washed her underwear and threaded it through the pickets on the backyard fence. Her laundry was still slow drying there one cloudy afternoon when Hubert and I drove the cows into the pen, as we learned when we saw Mr. Tyke fumble among the pickets and then draw back, extracting a long snow-white garment. We both ran yelling at the same instant to try and retrieve it. The sudden commotion brought Grandma swiftly to the kitchen door, thinking that one of us was being gored. She realized that the crisis was of a different nature when she saw Mr. Tyke fleeing from us in circles around the cow lot with two long, lacy pennants fluttering over his back. Out she came, stripping biscuit dough from her fingers as she ran. "Stop that nasty thief!" she cried, recognizing an item from her best Sunday-go-to-meeting wardrobe. Mr. Tyke was on his fourth or fifth lap around the pen when he slowed down near the gate and swerved to avoid colliding with one of the milk cows. Grandma reached out, and her desperate hand closed like a steel trap on one ruffled ankle. She felt a jerk, and before she knew it, she was standing among the cows. The bull was willing to stop and settle the matter, rather than drag Grandma all over the milking pen first. He swung about, facing her. Grandma pulled. Mr. Tyke held on. Mr. Tyke pulled. Grandma held on. In her wildest nightmares, Grandma had never pictured herself squared off in hand-to-hand, or rather, leg-to-leg combat with a lethal Jersey bull. And if Mr. Tyke had bad dreams, the chances are that not one of them included a black-dressed, flowery-aproned old lady trying to deprive him of his cud. Although her position was critical, to say the least, Grandma at this close range could see for the first time that Mr. Tyke's rolling eyeballs were glassy with fear, as well as surprise. "Let loose, you ornery billy goat!" she shouted, and she drew back her free hand and slapped him on the side of the head. Mr. Tyke recoiled from the blow and brought the struggle to a quick finish. The two halves of the disputed garment parted company down the middle seam. Grandma's firecracker temper, which usually fizzed harmlessly and then went out, exploded. "Now look what you've done, you—" She grabbed a milking stool and whacked him on the head. "Bah!" he protested, backing into the fence. "Bah yourself!" Grandma mocked him. She snatched the other half of the booty from his open mouth and sped to the yard, flushed and victorious, and dangling an orphan tube of muslin in each hand. The next afternoon she walked over to visit Barbara Smith. She passed the creek where Hubert and I were catching crawdads. At the junction of the two parts of the pasture, she selected a cow path and struck out boldly across the unprotected upper section. Mr. Tyke saw her from the edge of the woods. He grunted angrily and pawed a shower of loose dirt into the branches above his head. Halfway to the gate, Grandma stopped and turned around. "You vulgar, loud-mouthed coward," she said. "Try and get 'em." Sedately, she walked on.
Sometimes some of our best teachers were our grandparents. G.C. Kehmeier recalls when his grandfather taught him a valuable lesson about money, budgeting, and hard work. Join G.C. in the classroom of life in Grandfather's Economics Lessons.
The Montgomery Ward Winter Catalog for 1929-1930 arrived at the Eckert Post Office in September 1929. The price for a Hawthorne flyer with a battery-powered light and carrier for schoolbooks was $35, postpaid. Grandfather noticed my interest. "I'm going to the sale Saturday at the Delta Sales Yard. Bring the $5 you earned last week for picking apples. You might be able to buy some wiener pigs. Take an apple box to put them in." Grandfather gave economic lessons. "I got a $5 bid for 5 pigs," Roy Schultz chanted in his best auctioneer voice, slapping his black leather gloves. "Going, going, gone. Sold to the lad there in the front row. 5 pigs for $5. Son, you've made a good buy." I paid the clerk and put the squirming, squealing pigs in the apple box. They were lonesome for their mother and hungry. In a few days I taught them to drink skim milk from a trough. I had to use my finger as a teat for a couple of days until they got the idea. Pigs' teeth are sharp. "Don't forget to weigh the corn you feed your pigs. I'm charging you market price." Grandfather taught economics. On March 15th, 1930, my 12th birthday, Dad hauled my 5 pigs back to the Delta Sales Yard. They were pets and followed me everywhere. It was tough to sell them, but I needed wheels. Schultz sold them for 7 cents per pound. Together, they weighed 1,080 pounds. After his 10%, I received $68.04. I paid Dad $2 for hauling them to market, and I paid Grandfather $29.50 for corn. The skim milk was free. I still had $38.44. The Montgomery Ward Spring Catalog arrived on Monday, March 17th. That evening, I checked out the Hawthorne flyer. It was still $35, postpaid. On Tuesday morning before school, I bought a money order from Elias Wenger, the Eckert postmaster, and sent away for the bicycle. The bicycle arrived a week later. I had wheels. I knew their price and took care of them. My bike was not loaned out except under close supervision. I kept the flyer until I finished college, and then I sold it for $10. And I didn't have to take Economics 101.